Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. Ethan Grayson leaned against the reinforced walls of his cabin, the wind howling outside like a pack of rabid wolves. The weather on Glacier 12 was brutal, but he'd grown accustomed to it over his 3 years as a miner. Isolation was a small price to pay for the freedom and the steady flow of credits. The colony had been abandoned by all but the most desperate and stubborn. Ethan considered himself both. The storm had arrived suddenly, faster and fiercer than the weather scanners had predicted. Visibility was near zero, the snow falling so thick it felt like the air had turned solid. He'd spent the last hour double-checking the seals on his cabin, ensuring that no errant frostbite would seep in through cracks. And then he heard it. A knock. It was faint but deliberate, distinct from the groaning of the wind or the rattle of loose ice. Ethan froze, his gloved hands hovering over a metal clamp. His first thought was that it might be ice shifting against the structure normal in such extreme conditions. But then it came again, more insistent. Someone or something was outside. Impossible, he muttered. The nearest mining station was over 300 kilometers away, and no one in their right mind would wander out in this weather. He glanced at the control panel by the door, which displayed the external temperature, minus 80 degrees Celsius. A human wouldn't last more than a few minutes out there. The knock came again, louder this time. Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering over the cabin's external camera controls. The screen flickered as the feed activated, the snowstorm rendering the image a blur of white noise. But through the static, he caught a glimpse of movement, a humanoid figure barely visible in the swirling chaos. "What the hell?" he whispered. Instinct and years of survival training screamed at him to ignore it. The storm would pass, and whatever was out there would either leave or succumb to the cold. But then he heard something new, a voice. "Human. Let me in. I beg you." The words were faint, carried by the storm, but unmistakably real. Ethan's pulse quickened. It wasn't the voice of any miner he'd known, nor the metallic tone of a drone. It was something else entirely, something he couldn't quite place. Against his better judgment, Ethan unlocked the airlock. The warning lights blinked red as the door slid open, a wave of freezing air rushing in. He squinted against the blinding snow, his breath turning to ice crystals in the frigid air. There she was. The figure stumbled forward, collapsing into his arms. Her skin was a metallic silver, her eyes glowing faintly with a pale blue light. Crystalline patterns etched across her body seemed to pulse with an inner rhythm, their colors shifting like the auroras that sometimes danced over the planet's frozen horizon. Ethan staggered under her weight, startled by the sheer cold radiating from her. Her form was humanoid but clearly alien. Her lips moved, but no sound came out as she shivered violently. "Please," she managed to whisper, her voice weak but filled with urgency. I'll reward you. Let me stay alive." He barely registered her words as he dragged her inside, slamming the airlock shut against the storm. The cabin's heaters roared to life, struggling to warm the air back to habitable levels. Ethan laid her down on the cot, his mind racing. Who or what was she? And what the hell was she doing on Glacier 12? He grabbed a thermal blanket and wrapped it around her, careful not to touch her icy skin directly. Her body temperature was unnaturally low, but she seemed to be stabilizing in the warmer air. Her glowing eyes flickered open, locking onto his. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice stronger now but still trembling. "Thank you, human." Ethan stared at her, his survival instincts warring with his curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone cautious. "And what are you doing here?" Her lips curled into a faint smile, though her expression was weary. "Aelith," she said. "I didn't mean to crash here. My ship. It's gone. They're chasing me." "Who's chasing you?" Ethan demanded, his eyes narrowing. But Aelitha's head lolled to the side, her strength spent. She had slipped into unconsciousness. Ethan sat back, his mind spinning. He had no idea what he had just gotten himself into, but one thing was clear: his quiet, isolated life on Glacier 12 had just become far more complicated. Let me know if you'd like more details or adjustments. The storm continued to rage outside, battering Ethan's cabin with relentless gusts of icy wind. Inside, the room was bathed in the soft, otherworldly glow emanating from Aelitha's crystalline body. Ethan sat across from her, sipping a steaming mug of synth coffee as he watched her stir under the thermal blanket. She woke slowly, her glowing eyes fluttering open and focusing on him. For a moment, she seemed disoriented, but then recognition dawned, and she sat up abruptly, clutching the blanket around her. Her movements were fluid but precise, like a predator assessing its surroundings. "Take it easy," Ethan said, holding up a hand. "You were half frozen when I found you. You're lucky I didn't leave you out there." "Lucky," she repeated, her voice soft but laced with a trace of irony. She glanced around the cabin, her gaze lingering on the reinforced walls, the outdated tech, and the hum of the heating unit. "This is your home?" "For now," Ethan replied, leaning forward. "You said your name's Aelith, right? And something about a crash. What happened out there?" She hesitated, her crystalline patterns dimming slightly, as though shielding herself. Ethan noticed her body language guarded, defensive. Whatever she'd been through, it had left her on edge. "I am Roddy," she began, her voice steady but distant. "My people are explorers, artists. Dreamers, perhaps. We do not make war, nor do we conquer. But others, those who hunger for power, they see us as prey." "Scavengers?" Ethan guessed, his brow furrowing. He had heard rumors of raiders and scavengers operating on the fringes of human-controlled space, preying on anyone who strayed too far from civilization. Aelith nodded. "They hunt us for what we carry, for what we are. My kind. We are not like you. Our bodies are conduits of light and energy. Each Roddy carries within them the knowledge of our entire civilization, our art, our science, our history. To those who would exploit us, we are living treasures." Ethan leaned back, trying to process her words. "You're saying your people store your history inside your bodies? Like a walking archive?" "Yes," she said simply. "And more. Our light is not just a record, it is a language, a tool, a weapon, though we seldom use it as such. When the scavengers found my ship, I was forced to flee. I sent a distress signal before I ejected, but I doubt it was received. My pod. It malfunctioned and brought me here." Ethan frowned. "So, those scavengers. You think they're still after you?" Aelitha's eyes darkened, the glow dimming further. "They are relentless. They will not stop until they find me. My light. It broadcasts a signal they can trace. I have done all I can to suppress it, but it is a part of me. If I remain here, they will come." Ethan cursed under his breath, the reality of the situation sinking in. He had saved her life, but in doing so, he might have painted a target on his back. Glacier 12 was remote, but not invisible. The scavengers would come, and they wouldn't care who got in their way. "Why didn't you tell me this before I let you in?" he demanded, his tone sharper than he intended. "I did not have the strength," Aelith replied, her voice tinged with regret. "And I hoped you would understand. I had no choice." Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand across his stubbled jaw. "So, what's this reward you promised? You said you'd make it worth my while if I saved you." Her crystalline patterns flared for a moment, casting intricate reflections on the walls. "My knowledge is yours to share," she said. "Technology far beyond what your people possess. Energy sources that could transform this frozen world into a paradise. Or," she added, her voice softening, "if you wish, I can take you with me when my people come for me. You would see stars your kind has never dreamed of." Ethan steadied her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't the type to trust easily, but something about Aelitha's demeanor, her desperation, her vulnerability rang true. She wasn't lying, at least not about the danger she was in. As for her promises, he wasn't sure he cared about paradise or distant stars. He just wanted to survive. "You're asking me to risk my life for you," he said finally. "To put a target on my back." "Yes," Aelith admitted. "But I would not ask if I had another choice." Before Ethan could respond, the cabin's proximity alarm blared, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. He leapt to his feet, his heart pounding as he checked the monitor. The external cameras showed faint shapes moving through the storm dark, mechanical silhouettes against the white expanse. Aelitha's patterns flared again, this time in alarm. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan grabbed his old plasma rifle from its stand by the door. "Then we'd better be ready. Would you like to expand further on Aelitha's backstory, the scavengers, or Ethan's inner conflict? Let me know." Ethan peered out through the cabin's frosted viewport, his grip tightening on the plasma rifle. The scavengers were here, their figures barely visible through the storm. Four humanoid machines emerged from the snow, their shape skeletal and utilitarian. Red lights flickered on their frames, scanning for heat or movement. A larger craft hovered in the distance, its massive engines kicking up a whirlwind device. Aelith stood behind him, her crystalline patterns dimmed to avoid detection. Her glowing eyes reflected his tension. "They'll search the area," she said quietly, her voice calm despite the danger. "If they don't find me quickly, they'll start targeting anything with a heat signature." "Then they'll target this cabin," Ethan replied grimly. "How many are out there?" She closed her eyes for a moment, her crystalline body pulsing faintly. "4 drones," she said. "And their ship. A Hunter-class vessel. Armed and heavily shielded." Ethan cursed under his breath. He had dealt with hostile wildlife and collapsing mines in his time, but this was something else entirely. "You're sure they're after you?" "Absolutely," Aelith said. "Their sensors are tuned to detect ruddy light signatures. They're scanning for me as we speak." Ethan turned back to the viewport, his mind racing. "Can't you hide that light or whatever it is you're broadcasting?" Aelith looked down at her hands, her expression conflicted. "I've already suppressed as much as I can. But the light, it's part of who I am. I can't make it disappear entirely." Ethan exhaled sharply, his breath fogging up the glass. "Then we have to give them something else to look at. A decoy." The plan. Ethan quickly assessed the situation. His cabin was sturdy but not indestructible. If the scavengers decided to destroy it, they wouldn't hesitate. He needed to draw them away and disable their ship before they could call for reinforcements. "I've got mining explosives in the storage shed," Ethan said, glancing at Aelith. "Not much, but enough to do some damage if I place them right." Aelith tilted her head, her crystalline patterns shifting as she processed the information. "We can use the storm to our advantage. I can project false heat signatures, make it look like I'm running toward the cliffs." "That'll draw the drones," Ethan said, nodding. "But what about the ship? It's got air support and probably enough firepower to level this whole area." Aelitha's expression hardened. "If I amplify my light, I can create a pulse strong enough to blind their sensors temporarily. But it will leave me exposed." Ethan frowned. "You'd make yourself a target." "I already am," she said simply. He steadied her for a moment, impressed by her resolve. "All right," he said. "Let's do this. I'll rig the explosives near the ship while you lead the drones away. Once they're distracted, I'll set off the charges and take out their engines." "And if they find me first?" Aelith asked. "They won't," Ethan replied, his voice firm. "I'll make sure of it." The diversion. The storm outside was relentless, its icy winds howling like a living thing. Ethan and Aelith moved cautiously through the snow, their figures barely visible against the blinding white. Aelith paused near the cliffs, her crystalline patterns flaring faintly as she sent out a series of decoy heat signatures. From the cabin, the scavenger drones detected the false signals and shifted direction, their red lights cutting through the storm. The skeletal machines moved with eerie precision, their mechanical limbs crunching through the snow. Ethan watched from a distance, his heart pounding as the drones pursued the decoys. "It's working," he whispered into his comm link. "Keep them moving." Aelith's voice crackled in his ear. "Hurry, Ethan. The ship is scanning for me again." He sprinted toward the scavenger's hovering craft, the explosives strapped to his back. The ship was a menacing sight, its angular frame bristling with weapons. Ethan crouched low, using the snowdrifts for cover as he approached the underside of the vessel. The attack. Aelith's diversion was holding, but barely. The drones were relentless, their sensors occasionally flickering back toward the cabin's direction. She pushed herself harder, her body glowing brighter as she amplified the decoys. It was draining, but she couldn't stop now. Ethan reached the ship, his hands shaking as he set the charges. The mining explosives were rudimentary but powerful, designed to break through thick layers of glacial ice. He placed them along the ship's rear engines, careful to avoid triggering any alarms. "Charges set," he whispered into the comm link. "Get ready for the fireworks." Before Aelith could respond, the ship's scanners turned toward her position. The Hunter-class vessel began to hover closer, its searchlights piercing through the storm. "They found me," she said, her voice strained. "I'll blind them now." Aelith stepped into the open, her crystalline body flaring with a blinding pulse of light. The snow around her sparkled as the light refracted in every direction, creating a dazzling spectacle. The scavenger drones froze, their sensors overwhelmed by the sudden burst. Ethan took his chance. He pressed the detonator, and the charges erupted in a deafening explosion. The ship shuddered as its engines were engulfed in flames, the blast tearing through its frame. It tilted dangerously before crashing into the snow with a metallic screech. The aftermath. The drones, their link to the ship severed, staggered, and collapsed into the snow, their systems fried by the explosion. Aelith's light dimmed as she stumbled back, exhaustion overtaking her. Ethan rushed to her side, his heart racing. "You okay?" he asked, gripping her shoulder. She nodded weakly. I think so. But the scavengers will send more once they realize their ship is gone." Ethan glanced at the wreckage, his mind already turning to the next challenge. "Then we'd better figure out how to get you off this planet before they do." Aelith's glowing eyes met his, gratitude and determination shining in their depths. "Thank you, Ethan. You didn't have to do this, but you did." Ethan shrugged, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Guess I've got a thing for saving reckless aliens." Despite the danger, Aelith smiled. For the first time since her crash, she felt a glimmer of hope. "Let me know if you'd like more details about the battle, the scavenger ship, or Aelith's powers." The silence after the battle was almost as deafening as the explosion itself. Ethan sat slumped against a snowbank, his breath forming icy clouds in the freezing air. The wreckage of the scavenger ship smoldered in the distance, its shattered hull throwing faint orange light across the snowy plains. Aelith crouched beside him, her crystalline patterns dim but steady. "We bought ourselves time," Ethan said, his voice hoarse from exertion. "But not much. If those scavengers head back up, they'll be here soon." Aelith nodded, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. "My distress signal is still active. If my people are nearby, they'll come for me." "And if they're not?" Ethan asked, his tone grim. "Then I'll leave," she said softly. "Alone. You've done more than enough, Ethan. I won't let you die because of me." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Not sure I'm ready to let you freeze out here again." Aelith smiled faintly, the crystalline patterns across her skin shimmering in response. You are peculiar for a human. My people have stories of your kind, stories of war, greed, destruction. Yet here you are, risking everything for someone you barely know. Ethan shrugged. Guess I didn't like the idea of leaving you out there to die. She tilted her head, studying him. Or perhaps you saw something more. A glimmer of hope. The two of them worked together to salvage what they could from the scavenger ship. Despite the damage, Ethan managed to pull a functioning power cell from the wreckage, a piece of advanced technology unlike anything he'd seen before. This thing could run my cabin for years, he muttered, holding the glowing cell in his hands. Aelitha's expression softened. It's yours. Consider it part of my promise. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Part? What's the rest? She hesitated, her gaze distant. When my people arrive, they'll want to know about you. About what you've done. You may not realize it, but your actions today. They've ensured the survival of my knowledge, and perhaps my entire race. That is no small thing. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. I didn't do it for the glory. No, Aelith agreed. You did it because you are kind. And that is why I will honor my promise. Before Ethan could respond, the faint hum of an approaching ship cut through the silence. He stood, his grip tightening on his plasma rifle, but Aelith placed a hand on his arm. It's them, she said, her voice filled with relief. The Roddy ship. The Roddy rescue vessel descended from the stormy sky, its sleek design glowing faintly with the same crystalline patterns that adorned Aelitha's body. It was larger than the scavenger ship, with smooth curves that seemed almost organic. As it landed, the snow around it melted into steam, creating an ethereal mist. Aelith stepped forward as the ship's ramp extended. 3 figures emerged, their forms similar to hers but more regal. Their crystalline bodies glowed with vibrant colors, and their movements were graceful and deliberate. They stopped a few meters away, their glowing eyes locking onto Ethan. One of them, a tall figure with intricate, golden patterns, spoke in a melodic tone. Aelith, you are safe. We feared the worst. Aelith bowed her head slightly. Thanks to him, she said, gesturing toward Ethan. This human saved me. The Roddy leaders studied Ethan, their expression unreadable. It is rare for a human to act selflessly toward one of us. You have our gratitude. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, not used to such attention. Just did what anyone would have done. The leader tilted their head. Not anyone. And for that, you have earned a choice. The choice. Aelith turned to Ethan, her expression serious. This is your moment, Ethan. My people can reward you with knowledge and technology far beyond what humanity has now. We could transform Glacier 12 into a livable world, make your life here easier than you ever imagined. She paused, her crystalline patterns glowing softly. Or, you can come with us. See the stars, learn our ways. It won't be easy, and it won't be safe, but it will be extraordinary. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. He had spent years in isolation, carving out a life for himself on this frozen wasteland. The idea of leaving it all behind was both terrifying and exhilarating. What happens if I stay? He asked. You will have what you need to thrive here, Aelith said. And I will never forget you. And if I go, he pressed. You will be part of something greater than yourself, she said. You will see wonders no human has ever seen. And you won't be alone. Ethan looked into her glowing eyes, searching for something, certainty, perhaps, or reassurance. Instead, he found only her quiet strength and an unspoken question, what do you truly want? The decision. Ethan exhaled, his breath fogging in the cold air. Well, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Guess I've always wondered what's out there. Aelitha's expression brightened, her patterns flaring with light. Then come with us, Ethan Grayson. The stars are waiting. The Roddy leader nodded approvingly, and the other Roddy stepped aside to allow Ethan and Aelith to board the ship. As the ramp closed behind them, Ethan glanced back at the smoldering wreckage of the scavenger ship and the desolate landscape of Glacier 12. It wasn't home anymore. The ship's engines hummed to life, and within moments, they were soaring into the stormy sky, leaving the icy wasteland behind. Ethan stood beside Aelith as the planet grew smaller in the viewport, his heart pounding with anticipation. For the first time in years, he felt truly alive.